Welcome back to XRP On Moon, the channel where we break down the biggest, boldest, and most controversial developments surrounding XRP and the future of global finance. Today's topic is something that has been exploding across the crypto space, sparking debates, excitement, and even disbelief. What if I told you that a new narrative is emerging that connects Donald Trump, XRP, and a potential escrow restructuring that could redefine how value is stored and transferred across the globe? And even more shocking, what if this theory suggests a valuation as high as $16,000 per XRP? Now, before you dismiss this as hype or fantasy, stay with me, because what we're about to unpack is layered, complex, and rooted in signals that many investors are quietly watching. Let's start with the foundation. XRP is not just another cryptocurrency. It was designed for speed, efficiency, and most importantly, institutional use. While retail investors often focus on price action and daily volatility, the real story of XRP has always been about its utility within the global financial system. Behind the scenes, Ripple has spent years building relationships with banks, payment providers, and even governments. And at the center of XRP's supply mechanics lies one critical component: escrow. Billions of XRP are locked in escrow accounts, released on a schedule that has always raised questions about control, scarcity, and long-term valuation. Now, here's where things get interesting. Recently, a wave of speculation has emerged, suggesting that a new kind of escrow arrangement could be forming, one that isn't just about gradual release, but about strategic locking tied to institutional demand. Some analysts believe that if large-scale financial entities begin using XRP as a bridge asset at full capacity, the available supply could effectively shrink overnight. Not because XRP disappears, but because it becomes locked into systems that require it for liquidity. In simple terms, the more XRP is used, the less of it is freely available on the open market. This is where the conversation starts to intersect with political power. Donald Trump, a figure known for shaking up traditional systems, has recently been linked, at least in speculative circles, to discussions around financial sovereignty, digital assets, and the restructuring of global trade mechanisms. While there is no official confirmation of a direct XRP deal, the idea being circulated is that a shift in U.S. financial strategy could involve leveraging blockchain-based assets for efficiency and control. And if that were to happen, assets like XRP, which are already positioned for cross-border payments, could become central to that transformation. Now, think about this carefully. If a government-level initiative were to require massive amounts of XRP to facilitate transactions, settlements, or even backing for certain financial instruments, what would happen to the price? Markets operate on supply and demand. If demand surges, while supply becomes constrained due to escrow or institutional locking, price pressure builds rapidly. This is the core argument behind the bold $16,000 per XRP claim. It's not about retail speculation driving price. It's about a potential revaluation based on utility at scale. But here's the key detail most people miss. For XRP to reach such extreme valuations, it wouldn't behave like a typical cryptocurrency anymore. It would need to function as a high-value liquidity token where even a small amount represents significant transactional power. In such a scenario, price becomes less about trading and more about efficiency. A higher price allows larger transactions to be settled with fewer tokens, reducing friction in the system. This is why some theories suggest that a high XRP price is not only possible, but necessary if it's to handle global liquidity flows. Of course, we have to approach this with a balanced mindset. The crypto space is filled with speculation, and not every theory turns into reality. However, what makes this narrative compelling is the convergence of multiple factors: increasing institutional interest, evolving regulatory frameworks, and the ongoing push for faster, cheaper global payments. Whether or not Donald Trump is directly involved, the idea of a major financial shift is not far-fetched. The world is already moving in that direction. So the real question becomes this: are we witnessing the early stages of a massive transformation, or is this just another wave of hype designed to capture attention? In the next part, we're going to dive deeper into how escrow mechanics could actually support such a dramatic price scenario, and why some insiders believe the current system is only a temporary setup before a much larger transition unfolds. Stay with me, because what comes next might completely change how you see XRP's future. The entire conversation starts to shift from simple price speculation into something far more structural, almost like looking under the hood of a global financial engine. Because escrow is not just a storage system for XRP, it is a controlled release mechanism that was designed to prevent sudden supply shocks and to build trust in the market over time. But what most people don't fully appreciate is how powerful that mechanism becomes if demand suddenly changes at a global scale. Right now, XRP's escrow releases are predictable, scheduled, and transparent. Every month, a portion of XRP is unlocked and some is returned back into escrow if not used. This creates a sense of stability, but stability in crypto is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it prevents manipulation through sudden dumps. On the other hand, it also means supply is technically waiting in the background, ready to be activated under the right conditions. And this is where theories about institutional acceleration start to become relevant. Imagine a scenario where major financial institutions, or even sovereign-level systems, begin integrating XRP not as a speculative asset, but as a liquidity bridge for real-time settlements. In that moment, escrow stops being just a passive supply holder and becomes an active strategic reserve. Instead of XRP slowly entering the market, it could be rapidly allocated to settlement channels, payment corridors, and cross-border liquidity pools. That shift alone changes how scarcity is perceived. Now, this is where the Trump narrative enters the conversation in speculative circles. Some analysts and online discussions suggest that if a political or economic shift in the United States were to prioritize domestic financial efficiency and global trade dominance, digital settlement assets could become a key focus. Again, there is no official confirmation of any direct XRP escrow deal tied to Donald Trump, but the idea being discussed is broader than any single individual. It's about policy direction, not personal involvement. And in that context, XRP often appears in conversations due to its existing infrastructure readiness. So if we follow that line of thinking, the escrow system could be reinterpreted not as a limitation, but as a controlled activation pool for large-scale liquidity deployment. And here's the critical point. When an asset transitions from speculative trading to utility-based demand, its valuation model changes completely. Traditional chart analysis becomes less relevant because the asset is no longer primarily circulating in retail markets. Instead, it is locked into transactional flow. This is where the more extreme projections, like $16,000 per XRP, begin to surface. Not because people expect retail investors to suddenly push price there, but because in a high liquidity environment, price can be mathematically influenced by settlement demand. If XRP were to be used as a core bridge asset between multiple currencies and financial systems, even small inefficiencies in liquidity could require higher unit valuation to maintain operational stability. In simpler terms, higher price can sometimes reduce friction in large-scale financial movement. Think about it like this. If a financial system is moving billions or even trillions across borders in real time, using a low-value unit creates logistical complexity. But if the unit value increases, fewer tokens are required to represent the same economic weight. This is one of the arguments often used by long-term XRP advocates who believe price is not just a market outcome, but also a functional necessity under certain adoption scenarios. However, the important layer that often gets overlooked is timing. Even if such a transformation is theoretically possible, it would not happen overnight. Financial systems are slow-moving by design. They require compliance, testing, integration, and global coordination. Escrow releases, regulatory clarity, and institutional onboarding all act as pacing mechanisms. That means any dramatic shift in XRP's role would likely unfold in phases rather than sudden spikes. Still, the reason this topic continues to gain attention is because multiple signals seem to be converging at the same time. Increased discussions around digital currencies and policy circles, expanding Ripple partnerships, and the ongoing global search for faster settlement solutions all contribute to a narrative that XRP is positioned in a unique spot within the financial evolution landscape. And so the question becomes more intense with each layer we uncover. If escrow is not a limitation, but a controlled deployment system, and if institutional demand begins to absorb liquidity faster than it is released, then what happens to price discovery when supply no longer behaves like a traditional market asset? By the time we start looking at liquidity corridors and global settlement networks, the entire XRP conversation stops feeling like a simple crypto discussion and starts looking more like an infrastructure debate about the future of money itself. Because at its core, XRP was never designed to compete with traditional cryptocurrencies in the way most people assume. It was designed to move value between systems that normally don't speak the same financial language, and that distinction becomes extremely important when we talk about large-scale adoption scenarios. If you look at the evolution of Ripple's technology stack, one of the most important developments has been the concept of on-demand liquidity. Instead of relying on pre-funded accounts sitting idle across different countries, liquidity can be sourced instantly using digital assets like XRP. This removes friction, reduces costs, and speeds up settlement times dramatically. In theory, this alone makes XRP incredibly valuable. in a world where cross-border payments still rely on outdated systems that take days to settle and involve multiple intermediaries. Now imagine that concept expanding beyond isolated use cases. Instead of just a few payment corridors between select financial institutions, you start to see a global web of liquidity pathways forming. In this scenario, XRP is not just being used occasionally, it becomes a constant intermediary layer for value transfer. Every transaction that passes through these corridors requires XRP to bridge currencies momentarily, even if only for seconds. That rapid movement creates what some analysts refer to as velocity demand, where the importance of the asset is not just in how much is held, but how frequently it is used. This is where things begin to connect with the idea of scarcity in a very different way. Most people think scarcity is only about supply, but in a high-velocity system, scarcity is also about availability at the exact moment of transaction. If XRP is continuously being used in settlement flows, then even a large total supply can feel constrained in real-time operational conditions. This creates a situation where liquidity efficiency becomes more important than raw quantity. Now, when we bring institutional adoption into the picture, the scale changes dramatically. Banks, payment providers, and even central financial systems operate at levels where small inefficiencies translate into massive costs. If XRP or similar assets can reduce those inefficiencies, then adoption is not just optional, it becomes economically attractive. And once adoption crosses a certain threshold, network effects begin to take over. More participants require more liquidity, which increases usage, which increases demand pressure. This is the point where speculative models like extreme XRP valuations begin to emerge in online discussions. The idea of $16,000 per XRP is not grounded in retail trading behavior. It comes from theoretical models where XRP is assumed to function as a global liquidity backbone under extreme usage conditions. In such models, price is not driven by hype or speculation, but by the mathematical requirements of settlement efficiency. If the system needs higher value units to handle larger transaction volumes with fewer tokens, then price becomes a functional adjustment rather than a market accident. However, it is important to understand that these scenarios are highly conditional. They depend on full-scale adoption, regulatory clarity across multiple jurisdictions, and deep integration into financial infrastructure. Without those elements aligning, XRP remains a highly useful but still partially utilized asset within the broader digital economy. That is why the debate around its future valuation is so divided. Some see inevitability, while others see overextension of theoretical assumptions. Still, what keeps this conversation alive is the pace at which financial systems are evolving. Central bank digital currencies are being explored globally, cross-border payment inefficiencies are under scrutiny, and institutions are actively searching for blockchain-based solutions that can scale. In that environment, assets like XRP often appear in discussions not as speculative tokens, but as potential infrastructure layers. And this is where the narrative tension builds. On one side, you have a system that is slowly modernizing, experimenting, and integrating digital assets in controlled environments. On the other side, you have speculative projections that assume rapid and massive adoption, leading to extreme valuation shifts. The truth, as always, likely sits somewhere between these extremes, shaped by regulation, technology readiness, and global financial coordination. One of the most important forces that cannot be ignored is regulation. Because no matter how advanced a technology is, no matter how efficient a liquidity system becomes, and no matter how strong the demand projections look on paper, nothing reaches true global scale in finance without regulatory alignment. And in the case of XRP, this layer is arguably the most decisive factor shaping its long-term trajectory. Global financial systems are not isolated. They are interconnected through a complex web of central banks, monetary policies, compliance frameworks, and cross-border agreements. Any asset that aims to operate at the level XRP is often associated with must pass through multiple layers of approval, scrutiny, and integration testing. This is not just about legality. It is about trust, transparency, and systemic stability. Financial institutions do not adopt new settlement layers lightly, especially when those layers could potentially influence liquidity flows at a national or international level. This is where the broader conversation around digital assets becomes even more politically sensitive. Governments around the world are actively exploring the idea of digital currencies, tokenized assets, and blockchain-based settlement systems. Central bank digital currencies are one example of this shift, where states aim to maintain control over monetary flow while upgrading the underlying infrastructure. In this environment, independent digital assets like XRP sit in a unique and sometimes complicated position. They are not central bank controlled, yet they are designed for institutional grade efficiency. Now, in speculative discussions that have circulated across crypto communities, political figures like Donald Trump are sometimes mentioned in connection with broader financial restructuring narratives. It is important to clarify that there is no confirmed or official XRP escrow deal tied to Trump. However, the reason his name appears in these conversations is due to his association with economic policy shifts, financial system reform discussions, and a general narrative of challenging existing structures. In online speculation, such associations often become symbolic rather than literal, representing potential changes in how global finance might evolve under different leadership approaches. If we step back and analyze this objectively, the real driver here is not any single individual or political figure. It is the direction of global financial modernization. Countries are actively looking for faster, cheaper, and more efficient ways to move money across borders. Traditional systems are slow, expensive, and dependent on multiple intermediaries. This inefficiency creates demand for alternatives. XRP, due to its design, often appears in theoretical models as one possible solution for bridging this gap. But regulatory approval is not just about technology readiness, it is also about control. Financial systems are deeply tied to sovereignty. When money moves across borders, it is not just value transferring. It is influence, stability, and economic power being exercised. This is why regulators move cautiously. Even if a system is faster and cheaper, it must still align with broader economic policies and risk management frameworks. This tension between innovation and control is where XRP's future becomes highly dependent on global coordination. If regulators begin to recognize and approve blockchain-based liquidity systems at scale, then assets like XRP could see expanded utility across multiple corridors. But if regulatory fragmentation continues, adoption may remain limited to specific regions or use cases, slowing down the kind of global network effect that extreme valuation theories rely on. And this is where the idea of exponential price projections, such as $16,000 per XRP, must be viewed through a very critical lens. These figures are not predictions based on current market behavior. They are hypothetical outcomes based on fully realized global adoption scenarios, where XRP becomes a core layer of international settlement infrastructure. In that theoretical environment, scarcity, velocity, and institutional demand could interact in ways that fundamentally reshape valuation models. But again, this assumes a level of coordination and adoption that has not yet been achieved. What makes this discussion so compelling for many investors is not certainty, but possibility. The financial world is clearly evolving. Systems are being tested, upgraded, and reimagined. And in that transition period, assets like XRP become focal points of both optimism and skepticism. Some see a future where it becomes a foundational settlement layer. Others see it as one of many competing technologies in a rapidly diversifying digital finance ecosystem. Everything comes back to one central reality. XRP's future is not being decided by a single announcement, a single political figure, or even a single market cycle. It is being shaped by a slow, complex convergence of technology, regulation, institutional behavior, and global financial necessity. And that is exactly why narratives like Trump XRP Escrow deal and extreme price projections like $16,000 per XRP gain so much attention online. They sit at the intersection of uncertainty and possibility, where imagination often runs faster than confirmed facts. At this stage, it is important to separate what is known from what is being speculated. There is no verified evidence of any direct XRP escrow deal involving Donald Trump or any political administration. What exists instead is a broader narrative ecosystem where XRP is frequently discussed in the context of financial transformation, institutional adoption, and future payment infrastructure. In that ecosystem, political names often become symbolic placeholders for system-level change, even when no actual connection has been established. What is real, however, is the ongoing evolution of global payment systems. Financial institutions continue to face pressure to reduce costs, speed up settlements, and improve cross-border efficiency. Traditional systems, while reliable, are slow and expensive compared to emerging blockchain-based solutions. This gap is what fuels continued interest in technologies like XRP. Its design as a bridge asset for liquidity makes it one of the few digital assets that is consistently discussed in institutional payment modernization conversations. But even if demand increases, the path to massive valuation shifts is not straightforward. Markets do not reprice assets based on potential alone. They reprice based on actual usage, regulatory clarity, liquidity depth, and sustained adoption over time. For XRP to reach anything close to the extreme figures circulating online, it would require a global-scale integration where it becomes a dominant settlement layer across multiple financial corridors simultaneously. That level of adoption would require coordination between private institutions, governments, and regulatory bodies across different jurisdictions, something that typically takes years, if not decades, to fully materialize. This is why experienced analysts often treat ultra-high price predictions with caution, not because innovation is impossible, but because financial systems evolve incrementally, not instantaneously. Every major shift in monetary infrastructure throughout history, from gold standards to fiat systems to digital banking, has taken time, negotiation, and gradual trust building. Blockchain-based settlement systems are no different in that regard. Still, the reason XRP continues to dominate discussions is because it sits in a uniquely positioned category. It is not just a speculative asset, it is also a functional piece of financial infrastructure already being tested in real-world environments. That dual identity is what creates both excitement and confusion. On one side, you have real utility and ongoing development. On the other, you have speculative projections that often extend far beyond current realities. So where does that leave us? It leaves us in a transitional phase. A phase where financial systems are clearly moving toward digital integration, but the final structure of that system is still being built. XRP may play a significant role in that future, or it may become one of several competing solutions. That outcome depends less on speculation and more on adoption speed, regulatory decisions, and institutional trust. And this is the most important takeaway from everything discussed across all parts. Narratives like $16,000 XRP are not predictions grounded in present-day market mechanics. They are extreme theoretical scenarios based on full-scale, global utility assumptions. Whether those assumptions ever become reality depends on factors that are still unfolding in real time. So as we close this breakdown, the smart approach is not to chase hype or dismiss innovation, but to observe the space with clarity. Understand the difference between confirmed developments and speculative narratives. Track real adoption, real partnerships, and real regulatory progress. Because in the end, the true value of any financial asset is not defined by stories around it, but by the real-world systems that choose to use it. This content is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered financial advice. Cryptocurrency markets are highly volatile and risky. Always do your own research and consult with a qualified financial advisor before making any investment decisions.